How you guys doing? You ready for one more session? You got it in you? All right, good. I've done more moving in the last 2 days than in 20 years as a Presbyterian. I just want you to know that. So it's been great. Well, a little bit more about my story to hopefully connect with your story. How many of you would say you lead a smaller church? You would consider your church small? Anybody? A few of us. We can just be honest. We're family now, right? So where I started, I never thought I would be in ministry, but I started with some really small churches. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. When I was 8 years old, I came home to my parents, and I just said to them, I went to Cub Scout that night, and I came home and I said, when I grow up, I want to be a lawyer. Now, I don't know what needs to be wrong with you at the age of 8 to want to be a lawyer, but all that was wrong with me, and I went to law school. You heard that part last night. And met the girl of my dreams, which was amazing, but halfway through, really felt a call, like a very strong supernatural sense of call into ministry, and finished law, but then went into seminary, and then was trying to figure out what to do with that. And I thought, well, I don't really think I have gifts for ministry. I don't really have the temperament of the pastors that I knew. And I thought maybe I'll teach, maybe I'll get my doctorate. I really didn't know what to do. And as we were praying about it, an opportunity came up north of Toronto with 3 little churches in a place called Oro that I had never heard of, about an hour north of Toronto. And we went up there. I preached one Sunday in January, and then the next week they had another guy, a classmate of mine, come in, and they had a preach off. So I won by 1 vote, which was a pretty resounding, ring of endorsement. A little pro tip, never go to a church where 49% of the people didn't want you to be the pastor, all right? That's what I discovered months later when I showed up. It's like, oh, most of these people wanted the other guy. All right. Anyway, I won by 1 vote. So when we got there, the churches were small. Really small. I did the circuit on a Sunday morning with the 3 churches. They banded together so that the 3 of them stapled together could afford, a student. And the first of the 3 churches had 6 people as average attendance. 6, not 60, but 6. So it's kind of like, you guys, that's it. Welcome to church. That's all we got. And when my wife, my young son, and I moved up from Toronto, we grew the church by 50% overnight. It was incredible. Outreach magazine called. We were on the cover, the whole deal. So, it was really small, and then the second of the 3 churches, average attendance was 14 on a Sunday, and then there was the mega church, which was the 3rd church, and they had 23 people on a Sunday morning. So adding all 3 churches together, we were about 40 people on a Sunday morning, and they had been that way for a generation. I ended up, God has done an incredible work. I'm still in that community with some of those same people. They're still part of Connexus Church, which is incredible. But really the one constant over the last 23 years has been change. Because I said to them, so how long is it, when was the last time you saw, somebody come in from the street who was interested in Jesus? And they're like, I think it was like 1980, and like they knew the year. I'm like, no, you should know the Sunday, like last Sunday, but it had been a decade or more since anybody came in off the street. And we just sat down and we tried to figure it out. I said, look, I don't know how to be a pastor because I was supposed to be a lawyer, and here we are. And I said, no offense to you. I don't think you guys are very good at being the church. That's my pastoral sensitivity coming along, Because I said, you're not very good at it. You have 6 people. Like, we need to be doing better than that. And the problem was they loved the church the way it was. There were 6 people in a community of 20,000 people who liked church the way it was, and that was the problem. And so what we had to do is we basically had to change everything. If you think of traditional mainline Canadian church, that was it. It was like stained glass, oak pews. It was like choir, but the kind of choir where you don't really have to be able to sing to be in the choir? Yeah, it was that kind of choir. It was organ music, but not good organ music. Somebody before had introduced choruses. Do you remember choruses? But again, it was 20 years out of date. Even in the 90s, it was songs from the 70s and the 90s, and it was like, guys, this is not working well. There's no young people. They had no kids ministry. I said, why do you have no kids ministry? And they said, well, because we have no kids. And I thought, I think this is chicken and egg here. Maybe the reason you have no kids is because you have no kids ministry. Why don't we start a kids ministry? So, we changed everything. So, about 40 people at church, adding all 3 people together. But then I said, well, we better have some elders meetings. Do you know how many elders there were when I got there? 18. For 40 people. I'm like, what, if you're here for 3 Sundays, they make you an elder? Like, how does this work? And then you were appointed for life. Like, for life. So we started praying for funerals. It's like, Lord, you need to take some of these people away, right? These are my great pastoral gifting coming out. We did a spiritual gifts inventory last year, and I thought, well, I should do mine again. And I got it because, a whole bunch of new people at our church and the whole deal. And so I took my gifts. I had to confess, I went to the elders and I went to the staff and I just said, okay, you know what my bottom 3 gifts are? Prayer, mercy, and serving. Bottom 3. I'm like, so I'm terrible at being a pastor. I really am. I'm not going to help you, but I really don't care. All right, so, it's the opposite gifting you need for ministry. But anyway, God has a sense of humor for all that. So I just said, guys, we have to change everything, like everything. We have to get rid of, so we finally, our denomination allowed term service for elders. I'm like, okay, some of you can resign, and they did, And so we had to move people out. We had to shrink the number of leaders down. Then we had to get a different group of leaders. We changed the music. We changed the governance. Within 5 years, we sold all 3 buildings, and we amalgamated the congregations. Because when they were built, like in the 19th century, they were like an hour apart, but then the car got invented. And it didn't make a lot of sense anymore to have 3 little churches within a 5-minute drive of each other. So we sold them, moved into elementary school, started a new name, new site, raised money, millions of dollars, moved into a brand new facility. We became the fastest growing church in the denomination and one of the largest. So we grew from that initial 40 to about 600 or 700 a decade ago. And then I began to ask, would it be better if we're really going to reach unchurched people to try this in a non-denominational context? Because I was part of a denomination that was the fastest declining denomination in the country, and we were the fastest growing church and the fastest declining denomination. It was really interesting. But we said, why don't we just start over again? And so we tried to buy the building. That didn't work out particularly well. So it's like, okay, we left millions of dollars on the balance sheet, started over again with $0, moved to the north, moved to the south, started Connexus with a couple of locations. Now we have 3 plus online. And the one constant in the midst of all that, because if you show up at our church Sunday, I won't be there. I'm going to be on my way to another conference. But if you showed up to our church Sunday, some of those people would still be there from the very beginning. Now, sadly, a lot of them have passed away because that was 23 years ago and it was an older church. But, even in that church of 6 people, there's one woman who's still left from those days and they remember it. But the one constant has been changed. And the nice thing about coming to something like Lift, coming here, is that you get all inspired and you get all excited. And in a few minutes, you're going to realize, oh, wow, I have to go home to my church, right? Do you ever have that feeling? It's like, got all these dreams, all these ambitions, and you come to a larger church like this for an event, or you go to a conference, and you're like, we don't have lights, we don't have resources. If I could take that soundboard home, we could pay off the mortgage of my church, the whole thing. Just one soundboard, that's all I need. Is theft really that bad, right? That's what you're thinking. But you got to go back, and you're like, I would love to lead change, but I don't know how. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight. How do you actually engage the reality? How do you get from where we were in 1995 when I was, not even finished seminary, didn't know which end was up, and the churches were dying and stuck? And how do you get to a place where now we're growing? We've I don't mean this to be discouraging, but encouraging. God can do anything. We're seeing a year in 2018 when our culture is going in the opposite direction. We're at Connexus Church. Our physical attendance is up 25% year over year, and our online attendance is up 300%. It's crazy. It's something we just launched 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago. And so we're seeing people come to faith, come to Christ, make decisions for Jesus in a culture that's going the other way. And if you came to our church this weekend, and I hope you will if you're ever in Ontario, you wouldn't even recognize it. You would be like, wait, the only thing I see is you're the same guy who was there 23 years ago, and about 20 of the people who are still left and remember those days, they're around too. And that's the only thing. The people are the same. The gospel's the same. The message is the same. It's just we've completely changed the method. So how do you get there? How do you lead change? So I want to start with this question. Why do people change? Why do people change? Why do people change? And you're like, oh, I'm a church leader. They don't, Case closed, let's go home. No, people do change, but I want you to think about it in your own life. Like, why do you change? And the more I've thought about it, the more I think, here's why I think people change. People change when the pain associated with the status quo is greater than the pain associated with the change. Now, that's a pretty technical language, but I want you to think about it. We already talked about snow tonight. All right, we're Canadians, right? So we're supposed to have snow tires and all-season tires. I guess you don't need that if you live in Vancouver, but where I live north of Toronto, you need to be switching winter tires versus regular tires, and that can be a pain. And you know what? Here's the other reality. Tires are expensive. I mean, you can drop $1,000 without being fancy on a set of winter tires or all-season tires for the summer without knowing it. And so what tends to happen, you ever done this where you thought, I wonder if I can get one more season out of these tires? You ever play that game? You're like, just one more season? So I want you to imagine, and I don't wish this on anyone because I know there's bad weather coming, but I want you to imagine you're driving home tonight and you're heading up on a mountain pass and you're not really, you're just driving along, and it's a little bit slick, but you're not really worried about it. And then all of a sudden, all you see in front of you, you got distracted, is a sea of brake lights. And you slam on your brakes, and your car starts to careen out of control. And you spin, you do a 360, you narrowly miss the guardrail, your car comes screeching to a halt, and you realize as soon as you come to your senses, oh my goodness, thank God, I didn't hit anybody or anything. And you realize you're okay, and you take your foot off the brake, you put your foot on the gas, and you slowly start to correct the car back into the lane, and you drive home. Where are you going tomorrow morning to get new tires? Because you almost didn't make it. What happened in that situation? The pain associated with the status quo, not very good tires, just became greater than the pain associated with change. And it is painful. It's going to be $1,000, or maybe you have to sit there for 2 hours while they change the tire on your car, or you have to get someone to drive in and drop you off, and then you have to go back later in the day and they drop you off, 2 vehicles, you pick it up again. I mean, it's a pain, but it's better than having an accident. And the pain associated with the status quo becomes greater than the pain associated with change. And that's kind of your job as a leader, is you've got to elevate discontent inside your organization. You got to make people mad. Isn't that fun? You got to make them uncomfortable where they're like, we just can't stand it. All we have is 6 people and nobody likes our church. I mean, that's kind of your job as a leader, is you've got to elevate the level of discontent. Now, this is important. It's really important for the church, but this happens all over the place. People who don't change, we're watching them drop like flies before our eyes. Who remembers this? Anyone remember having to go get a movie at Blockbuster? Yeah. You don't have to be that old to remember Blockbuster, right? But there was a day, you can tell your kids and grandkids this one day, where you actually had to leave your house to go and rent a movie on an actual DVD, and then you would have to take it home, and if you didn't bring it back in time, you got what? Late fees. That's right. You were in trouble. And remember even before DVDs, when there was VHS, what did it say on the box? Be kind. Yeah, see, you have stories for your kids and grandkids. Isn't that amazing? Now, what happened to Blockbuster? This is fascinating. There was a startup company called Netflix in 1999 that said to Blockbuster, this is true, hey, Blockbuster, we think online is going to be something. How would you like to merge? And we can do like, they were at the time, Netflix was actually a mail order DVD store. That's what they were. It's like you mailed in your request, they mailed you the DVD, they had no late fees. You know what Blockbuster said? No way. And about 6 years ago, Blockbuster shut down for good. There was this tweet that came up on my Twitter feed. I couldn't believe it. It was actually from Blockbuster in 2011. And it said something like, "Who's sick of watching videos online?" Apparently nobody, but, they were like, that was their death knell, I guess. But there's Blockbuster. They didn't change. They bet on the wrong thing. Now, the mission continues. I mean, you're probably going to watch a movie in the next month, right? You're just going to get it delivered differently. They got hung up on the method. They lost the mission in the process. Here's a couple of other companies. Sears, remember them? Kodak. You know what's so ironic? Sears was profitable until 2012. But there was an investor who just kept stealing from the company, taking illegally, it wasn't stealing, but he kept raiding it for profits. They didn't invest in the infrastructure. They never really got on board. They came up with things like, what was that? I don't know. But anyway, actually, one of the guys we hired recently at Connexus worked on that campaign, so that was interesting. And then Kodak. Do you know who invented the digital camera? Kodak. The very first website in the year 2000 that you could upload a picture you took on a digital photograph was started by Kodak. It was a site called oPhoto. And here was a debate inside Kodak. Adam Grant tells the story in his book, The Originals. Fantastic book. The debate inside Kodak was, what are we going to do with this website where people can go online and actually upload their photos? And some people said, well, people will want to share their photos digitally. Kodak said, no. We're going to create a site where you can go up and you can upload your photos and then print them off the website. Now, they said, here's what we are. We're really into print, and we make the best prints in the world. They lost that debate too, didn't they? You know who killed Kodak ultimately? Instagram. Because nobody prints their pictures anymore. And Kodak bet the wrong technology. And they invented the digital camera. So you look at Sears, you look at Blockbuster, you look at Kodak. Those are companies that didn't change. But for us, the stakes are even higher than that. They're higher than you think. A few years ago, a friend of mine died. And he was in his early 50s, died of just this chronic disease he had. It was tragic. I was at the hospital when he passed away, did the funeral, and I remember walking away from his graveside really kind of broken up. It was tough. This is in the little hamlet that we lived in at the time. And I remember walking back to the car after the service was over, and I saw this headstone, and it was really, really interesting. Because I don't know whether you've been to graveyards. I mean, a lot of you are pastors, so you've spent some time there. But people always put like really comforting words on their tombstones, something from John or the 23rd Psalm or whatever. And look at this. This is what I found on this headstone at the East Oro Cemetery where I used to live near. It said, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." And I thought, I've never seen a version of the Great Commission. That's from Mark. I've never seen the Great Commission on anybody's headstone. And I started to wonder, who would put that on their headstone? Who would put that on their tombstone? Was it a preacher? Was it a lay preacher? Was it somebody who was just into introducing his friends and family to Jesus? I thought, you know what? When I die, I want to be like that guy. I want to have that to sort of be my life thing rather than, in my house are many rooms or the Lord is my shepherd or whatever. I don't want pastoral care. I want mission on my tombstone. And I thought, so I wonder who that is. And I went around to the other side, and you know what? It wasn't for a person, it was for a church that closed. Now, if you look really carefully, I took that when I was cycling one day, so there's a middle-aged man in spandex. You really don't want to look too closely at that picture. You don't. But those are nice legs, if you ask me. It was an Anglican church, and it stood at that site until 1987. Built in 1880, replacing the original structure, which was erected in 1842. Weekly services till 1970, annual services till 1985. Deconsecrated and then demolished in 1987. And on their tombstone, the Great Commission. You know what's going to happen to your church and my church if we don't change? That's what's going to happen. But what terrifies leaders is they're like, no, you don't understand. It's so hard to lead change. And what frightens people is we go home and we're like, our church doesn't want change. I know the change we need to make. It's too hard to lead. How do we do that? How do we not blow it up? And so I want to walk you through 5 principles that I had to kind of learn the hard way in the early years of my leadership that I kind of still use to this day when leading change. And hopefully they can help you. Because a lot of us, we're just so afraid of change, even as leaders, that we're like, I don't want to lead my church through that. I know what has to happen, but the price is too great. I tried to introduce change a few years ago. It almost blew up in my face, or I lost that congregation. So strategy number 1 is simply something that I call do the math. Do the math. That you got to do the math. And there's actually math involved in change. And the culture really breaks down, and this is true in the church, this is actually true in society, into 4 categories. For simplicity purposes, some sociologists say 5 or 6. For tonight's purposes, I'm going to outline 4, all right? One category of the types of people, the personality of the people who are in your church, are people that we call early adopters, just early adopters. And I want you to think about technology, all right? It's really easy to think about. There are people, early adopters. I'm an early adopter. I'm the kind of person who's up at 3 a.m. Eastern time to order the latest phone. Do you know people like that? Are any of you like that? Like you'll line up around the block or you'll get up at midnight Cupertino time? Anybody? Oh, it's way too late to put your hand up, isn't it? Yeah. There's nobody who does that here? Well, interesting. Okay, I'm alone. Anyway, but early adopters, right? You got to have the latest and the greatest. You're watching trends. You want to see that. Oh, you're pastors, right? I get that. So it's like, phones, what a luxury. I know that. So, the pony comes by delivering the mail. It's all good. It's all good. So early adopters. And that's one group in the culture. The other group is early majority. Early majority. Now, these are people who, they're not going to get up at midnight or 3 a.m. They're not going to line up around the block. But they're watching stock levels going, you know what, the iPhone 10 or the iPhone 8, they're in stock now, or Samsung's latest product, it's in stores now. So I'm not going to wait in line, but I don't mind going to get it, so I'm going to go get it. And that's the early majority. They're not first, but they don't mind being next. The next group, sociologists call the quiet majority. And this is quite a few people who are just yeah, I'm not opposed to technology. I think it's great. But, hey, are you done with that old phone that you only had for a year? Yeah, I'll take that one at a reduced price. Or maybe their kid's getting them something for Christmas, or their spouse gets it for Christmas, or they wait until it's $99 or $0, But, hey, phones are great. I'm not going to line up. I'm not going to go check stock. When I get the new phone, I get the new phone. It's fine. It's fine. And then you have this 4th group, and we'll call them the opponents. These are people who think phones are terrible ideas. All right? You should be able to talk to people in person. You don't need a cell phone. Cell phones are ruining our entire culture. And opponents, they tend to be opposed to just about everything. They don't like phones. They don't like technology. They don't like church. They don't like the shirt you're wearing. I mean, you know what I mean? Those kinds of people. And what happens when we're leading change is most of us get smoked out by the opponents. We just get terrified by the opponents, and that's why it's so important to have the first strategy, which is to do the math. Now, if you were to break that down as a percentage of the population, what percentage of the population do you think each sociological group would represent? What percentage of your church are early adopters? You're like 0? Not true. What percentage of your church are early majority, quiet majority opponents? According to sociologists, kind of breaks down this way. 10% are early adopters, 10% are opponents. 30% are the early majority, 50% are the quiet majority. Now, Where a lot of church leaders start to push back is they're like, Carey, you don't understand. 10% of my congregation is opponents? No, you don't know my church. It's more like 30%, more like 20%, more like 50%, more like 100%, all right? Those are our people. I want to encourage you to really do the math, and this is where the math can be your friend. Let's say you have a church of 100 people, and I've challenged hundreds, maybe thousands of leaders to do this. Write down the names of the opponents. Like, write them down on a sheet of paper. If you have a church of 100, often it's really difficult to come up with more than 10. If you have a church of 1,000, it's really hard to come up with a list of more than 100. If you have a church of 20, you probably have a couple of cranks. That's what you've got. You probably got 2 or 3 at the most, and maybe it's 20% or whatever. But opponents, you know, it's kind of weird. Opponents are the people that you remember. Opponents are the people that scare you. And there's 2 mistakes that leaders make, and I want to share them with you. Number 1, it's confusing loud with large. Do you know what the problem with the opponent is? Is you remember what they said. They're the ones who like come to a congregational meeting, and they're the ones who line up at the microphone. You know those people? It's like, is this on? Is this on? You know? And they get frequent flyer points for how often they're behind the microphone. And they kind of break down the whole day where they're like, well, you know, like I said at the last congregational meeting, and it's surprise, it connects us. We don't have congregational meetings anymore. Why? Because we had too many, so we just abolished them. It's like, now we don't have them anymore. It's great. Saves on microphone costs, too. But it's easy to confuse loud with large. Because what do you remember after a congregational meeting? The 2 or 3 or 4 ranting, angry people who kind of hijack the whole meeting? How about your inbox? Right? Your inbox, you get people who are mad and they're writing in all caps. You ever notice when it's all caps and no spaces, it's never a good email? It's never like, that was an awesome message. It's like little death threats, you know, just put in there. And you remember when you go home, maybe you processed 100 emails that week. What's the one you remember? What's the one you're talking about at dinner? It's the angry person. And the mistake that you make as a leader is because the opponents are loud, you assume that it's a large number of people. And if you ask the opponent, they will tell you, oh yes, I speak for everybody. Right? It's like, I used to have fun with that. It's like, really, you spoke to everybody? Like, that's amazing. How did you reach them all? Like, tell me more. It's like, well, maybe not everybody, but there's a lot of people who are upset. Lots and lots and lots of people. And they claim to speak for everybody. And you're like, well, do they? Do they speak for everybody? Like, do they really? And they will tell you that they do. You know what else opponents say? Is like, if you do the changes that you're proposing, we're going to take our giving and we're going to take it somewhere else. That's why you should do the math. You should see how much do they really give. And then the next time they say it, you're like, really? You're going to take both dollars and give them to another church? That's amazing. But often the people who complain a lot, you know, the people who tell you should get, I lived a decade without financial disclosure, then I got it, I was shocked. I remember, because I remember at first it wasn't full disclosure. I'm like, oh, you left some people off the list. And I'm like, what about the Smiths and what about the Joneses? And they're like, no, they're not on the list. I'm like, but they tell me how much they give every week. They were lying. Or they thought they were generous, or maybe they got churches confused, you know? It was like, oh, yeah, that's the name of your church. That's where all our checks went. Okay, you know, I don't know, but like the people who tell you they're generous usually aren't. And often when you get disclosure, you'll see, oh my goodness, there's some people who give like a lot of money to this ministry. I don't even know who they are. And they never complain. And the mistake you make and the mistake I made too often is, we mistake loud for large. And when you really look at it, here's what's happening. The opponents are loud. The early adopters, you know, they're also the loudest group. And then surprise, surprise, the early majority and the quiet majority, they're pretty silent. Usually the only people you hear from in a congregation are the top and bottom 20%. Now, you know what an opponent sounds like. Nobody has to give you a graduate course in that. You know exactly what they sound like. You can mimic their voices right now in your head, the ones in your church. What does an early adopter sound like? You know what an early adopter sounds like? Great conference. Thanks, Ken. That was awesome. Really appreciate it. Hey, I love where you're going with your church. Great job. Man, that was so convicting. Thank you for what you're doing. Hey, we're praying for you. We're praying for you and your family. Just want you to know that. Now, you know what I do? I don't know whether you do this, but you know what I do? Is when I hear the voice of an early adopter, I discount it. I think they're just trying to be nice. Or I don't know whether they really meant that or not. Maybe they didn't really mean that. Or did you really think it was a good message? Did you really think that was a good direction? And I discount it. But the voice of the opponents, I treat it as though it's gospel. It goes straight to your heart. And I can't get that voice out of my head. I can't get that email out of my head. This is such a dumb move, but I discount the voice of the early adopters. And I over-listen to the opponents. Now, who do you think is going to lead the way into the future? The early adopters, not the opponents. Second mistake, we assume. So the first is confusing loud with large. Number two, assuming that volume equals velocity. That because the opponents are loud, because the opponents have strong opinions, we assume that they're going somewhere. Well, you know who's going somewhere? Look at this. If we can have the next thing. The early majority, quiet majority, and the early adopters, they're all going places. They are moving into the future. The opponents aren't. They're stuck. And if you ever poll the opponents, let's say you have 10 in your church of 100, or even 15, for argument's sake. You're like, so tell me what the future looks like. They don't even agree with each other. They're not in favor of anything. They're just opposed to everything. And so you're like, how can I build the future of the church on that? And the answer is you can't. So strategy one is simply do the math. And when you realize, oh my goodness, this is a tiny minority. This is just a small group of people who want to sabotage the future. It helps. It gives you a reality check as a leader. Strategy number two is simply this: choose your focus. Choose your focus. I learned this years ago from my friend Reggie Joyner at North Point. He said, you can focus on who you want to reach or who you want to keep. And you need to choose your focus. It's like, is our church going to be focused on who we want to reach? The community, the city, the county, the region, the nation that we're called to reach? Or are we going to be focused on who we want to keep? Hey, if you got 6 people in your church, you haven't got much to lose, right? It's like you only got 6 people, so who are you going to focus on? 2 questions have really helped me about focus. First of all, who would you rather lose, the opponents or the early adopters? It's kind of the opponents. I think that's a no-brainer. Look, they're going to heaven anyway. They don't have to go on your bus. They can go on someone else's bus. They can complain and not give and not serve and not invite their friends at somebody else's church. They don't have to do it at your church. You can be like, oh, you know, there's a great new church down the road. You should go there. Try that, you know. Who would you rather lose? Because here's the reality. You're going to lose somebody. Because if you don't lose the opponents, you know who you're going to lose? You're going to lose the early adopter. What does it sound like when an early adopter leaves? It sounds like this. You'll never know. Because they're not going to make a big scene. They're not going to fight with you. They're not going to write an angry letter. They're not going to hog the mic at the congregational meeting. Just one Sunday, they're not going to be there. And you'll run into them weeks or months or years later somewhere in town, and you're going to be like, Rob, haven't seen you in ages. And suddenly you remember, oh yeah, you used to go to my church, and you were one of the good guys. And then you find out, well, what happened? And they're like, well, you know, we ended up this church down the road, or we started this thing, and so we love you, and we think you're great, but we just kind of had to go where there was progress. And if you won't lead the early adopters, they will find someone who will. And that's what you have to remember. So who would you rather lose, the opponents or the early adopters? Secondly, and this is the one that really keeps me up at night, is it more frightful to lose a handful of people or to never accomplish your mission? You know, one day I'm going to have to give an account to God. We've been joking around a lot tonight, just for fun, because this is a hard subject. But I'm going to have to give an account to God for how I stewarded my leadership. And if I stand before him one day and it's like, well, there were these 4 people at our church. There were these 30 people at our church. There were these 80 people at our church. And I was so scared and I thought I might get fired. And, you know, they kind of held all of us hostage. And so I just didn't have the courage to lead. I didn't want to trust you enough to get through that logjam, God. I don't want to do that. Or do I stand before him and go, you know what? I know what you asked me to do. I just didn't have the courage or the trust to do it, so I didn't do it. As I've said to our church 1,000 times, listen, I don't know whether this is going to work, but we're going to go broke trying. Who's in? You want to go broke trying? Like, we're going to try this. We're going to try to reach some people. We're going to do some things that other people aren't doing. Are you ready? And we haven't done a perfect job, but we've tried. We've gone for broke over and over again. And I don't want to stand before God one day and say, you know what? I was just too afraid. So that's a question that can keep you up at night. That's a question that keeps me up at night. And if you focus on who you want to keep rather than who you want to reach, this is what ends up happening. It's not just that you're trying to placate 10 people out of 100. You're actually allowing, let's say you're in a town of 10,000 people. You're allowing 10 people in your church to ruin the future of 10,000 people who could be reached for the gospel. It is a complete reversal of the story of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost sheep. Jesus said, if you have 99, you just let them go. You abandon them, and you go after the one. We're saying, we got the one. We're going to forget about the 99. It's a reversal of the gospel. And so are you going to let the 10 people who stand in the way of change let you never reach a city or a town of 10,000 people? I don't think I can do that as a leader in good conscience. So you got to choose your focus, who you're going to focus on as a church. Are you going to focus on who you're going to reach or who you're going to keep? I remember the first time I got an iteration of this. I was 3 years into my ministry, a year into my ordination. We saw some ordinations celebrated tonight. It was 1998, and I was in the little stained glass churches. I mean, everybody would have fit in this section right there, and that's probably an exaggeration. And they're beautiful century-old stained glasses. We were still in the old building. And I remember just being impressed. I think it was the Spirit of God moving on me. That, you know what? I love the people who are in the pews, even though there's 1 or 2 opponents. I absolutely love those people. They're darling people. But that God was more concerned about the people who are outside the stained glass window than he was with the people who were inside the stained glass window, because we were going to heaven. And God is concerned more about what's going on outside the church than inside the church. Last week I was in Orlando speaking at a conference at Exponential, and I was leaving Toronto on Air Canada, and there was a guy who was my seatmate, and we were the only people in that section of the plane, and he goes, well, I guess we don't need to sit together, so ha, ha, ha. He moved, and that was all cool. It was all great. 2 days later, we're both on the same flight back to Toronto. We're lining up. We're first in line, and he goes, here we are again. So he goes, what do you do? And I never tell them I'm a pastor because that kills the conversation, right? Oh, what do you do? I'm a pastor. It's like, oh, that's it. So I'm like, I'm a public speaker. And he goes, really? Really? What do you talk about? And I'm like, well, you know, I talk to leaders and, you know, church leaders. And he goes, so, like, do you have any resources on public speaking? Because he said, I have to do this. He was in international business. He has a PhD. He says, but that's my greatest fear. And I said, actually, I've written some stuff, and I just actually filmed a course on public speaking, but it won't be out till the summer. I said, he gives me his business card, so I send him a couple of blog posts I wrote on my blog about how to give a talk without using notes, etc. So he emails me back. Literally, I get this in my inbox today. And he said, hey, thanks. That was really helpful on public speaking. He says, I don't want to annoy you, but he says, you know, I'm a scientist. I'm into quantum physics. He says, I have a PhD. I've always wondered, like, I really can't believe in a God who started the universe, but all my friends who have faith, they just seem to have this peace that Those of us who don't have. Do you think it's possible to find peace without God? I hope I'm not annoying you with my question. Couldn't wait to email him back. Like, here's a link to 2 messages I just gave on science and faith, and here's a link to, and here's my thought. I said, you know what? I know a lot of people who meditate, whether that's Buddhist or whatever. I know a lot of people are into mindfulness. They do yoga and everything. And I said, I actually think it helps. I think you can do that. But for me, I find that's not enough. I actually have a connection with a person that I think started the universe. And I have a peace that I don't think you can just get from that. This may be the beginning of a dialogue. Do you know how many people there are in your communities like that? Who don't even know any Christians? And you're going to let 10 people stand in the way? 10 people, honestly, who, and I don't want to be too negative, but like who care more about themselves than they do about the people that are far from God? Because it's never about principles, it's about preferences. It's about what color should the carpet be, red or green? 2 denominations right there. You know, church split. There you go. Strategy number 3. Find a filter. Find a filter. Without a filter, everything sounds compelling. Do you ever feel like this as a leader? There's a little diagram I drew one day. You ever feel like that? And it's like I got all these voices coming to me. And you have a staff meeting if you have a staff, and you're like, oh, that's a good point, that's a good point, that's a good point. Then you have your elders meeting. It's like, and that's a good point, and that's a good point, and that's a good point. You're like, how do I even know? And what if the opponents are right? What if God is speaking through the opponents? Because they all claim God is speaking through them. Like, what if God is speaking through the opponents? Like, how do I even know who to listen to? And so you got to find a filter. And early on, because, you know, when you sell buildings and change everything and throw sticks of dynamite into your church, people get upset. And so I had to learn, like, okay, I got to figure out, where do I hear the voice of God in the midst of this? So I developed just 2 questions that will help shape your future. Here are the 2 questions I've used for over 20 years. Number 1, is there a biblical argument in what the critics are saying? You should ask that, because God speaks through people you don't like. God speaks through people that get under your skin. God speaks through everybody. And so, you know, is there a biblical argument in what they're saying? And if there is, you need to pay attention as a leader, whether you like the person or not. Now, in my experience, when it comes to change in the church, it's almost never about biblical principles. The arguments are about personal preferences. It's, I don't like this style of music. It's like, what's wrong with those lights? Why are they blue, right? For 8 years, we were a double portable church. We met in movie theaters. We always wanted to use haze, you know, that fog stuff. We always wanted to use it, but we couldn't because of fire codes. So 2 years ago, we moved into our building, and, you know, it's our building, so we can use haze. So we start using haze on a Sunday morning. Looks better on video, looks better on online, blah, 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 blah. So we're using this haze. All of a sudden, I see, and we got lights, like lots of lights. I don't know, lots of lights. So anyway, there's people who all of a sudden start showing up with sunglasses on, you know. Inside, I'm like, is this a silent protest? What's happening? Then I got a couple angry emails. There's this little, like, ripple through the church, and it was like, what is that noxious substance that rolls off the stage on Sunday morning, and why are you poisoning our children? I don't know. I mean, so I asked our tech guys, I'm like, guys, what's on that? Like, what is haze? I don't even know what it is. And, you know, I assumed it was carbon dioxide, or I don't know what it was. I don't even know my science. So maybe we were trying to kill people. And I find out it's water. That's it. So I email them back like, oh, it's water. And they're like, we still think it's poisonous. Okay, I don't know what to say to you anymore. It's water. Well, we liked it better when you didn't use water. You know, it's like, they left. Over water in a church. You know, I don't get it. I thought that was baptism. We're just doing mass baptisms, you know. It's like everybody, 400 people baptized at one service. So anyway, is there a biblical, and often it boils down to, I don't like the fog. I don't like, you got rid of the pews. I don't like this. It's too dark. It's too light. It's too bright. It's too whatever. I don't know what to do with that. But there's nothing biblical in it. It's just personal preference. That's all it is. And then secondly, and maybe there is, if there is something biblical, listen up. If not, ask yourself this, are these the kind of people we can build the future of the church on? And that's a clarifying question. Because you're like, okay, good point, good point, good point, good point, good point, good point. What do I listen to? You pray about it, but God's like, you got to use your judgment here. And I just developed that question, and it's been a fairly reliable guide over the years. It's like, is this the kind of person that we can build the future of the church on? And you know what? If they serve, and if they've got friends on their arm every week who don't know Jesus, and if they give and they got skin in the game, I'll listen. Because that's the kind of person you can build the future of the church on. If they're leading something in life and they're healthy people and, they're organizing everything in their community or they're running a startup or, they're respected in their field, it's like, I should probably listen to this person. If they're just opposed to everything all the time and have done nothing with their lives, they're just kind of professional critics, I don't know whether I should listen as much. So that's been very helpful. I don't know whether it's helpful for you. And then that gets us to the fourth principle, which is always this, what about the people? What about the problem? Some of you are like, well, you know what? I think the people are the problem, right? I would love my church if it wasn't for people. Well, it wouldn't be a church, But, and I learned this. I picked this up in law school. This is from a classic negotiating book that's still in print. It's used at Harvard and many other places. It's called Getting a Yes by Fisher and Urey. And the principle is simply this: attack problems, not people. Attack problems, not people. You have to separate the person from the problem. And that's really important in legal negotiations. It's like, because you can come at it and say, and this is how you get into a fight at your house, right? It's like, you never, you always, and why do you, and that's how marriages fall apart, relationships, friendships fall apart. A much healthier approach is to say, you know what, we're on the same side here. We have this problem over here. You don't like fog. You don't like haze. I'm going to try to figure out what the problem is. And, it's just water. And then they're like, blah, 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 blah. Well, all right, we can solve it. But you got to separate the person from the problem. And that can be challenging because sometimes you're just going to let loose on the people. And that can be hard for you as a leader. And this gets into some of the territory that we got into last night. And I want to encourage you, turn to God, because if you don't turn to God, you'll turn on them. And there are going to be times where you're so angry and you're so frustrated. And I want to read to you just from the Psalms. You ever read the Bible? It's pretty good. Psalm 109, here we go. This is David. The nice thing is we know what David was thinking because we have his prayer journal. And this is, remember when he was in the cave and Saul was hunting him down? Like, it's got to be tough to be David in that season. And all of a sudden, I was reading this a number of years ago, and I'm like, are you kidding me? This is in the Bible? So this is actually a prayer of David. He said this: Dear God, appoint someone evil to oppose my enemy. Let an accuser stand at my enemy's right hand. When he is tried, let my enemy be found guilty, and may his prayers condemn him. In other words, when he prays to you, just send him to hell, God. Look at this, verse 8. This is actually in the Bible. Verse 8. May his days be few. Make another take his place of leadership. May his children be fatherless and his wife a widow. May his children be wandering beggars. May they be driven from their ruined homes. May creditors seize all he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his labor. May no one extend kindness to him or take pity on his fatherless children. May his descendants be cut off, their names blotted out from the next generation. May the iniquities of his father be remembered before the Lord. May the sins of his mother never be blotted out. Great, now you're dragging my mom into it. Thank you. May their sins always remain before the Lord, and may he blot out their name from the earth. Amen. This is in the Bible. Preach that on Sunday, all right? There's your text. Like, what is it? This is what, what David is doing? He's in the cave going, God, kill the guy. Kill him. I'm sick of him. This guy's an egomaniac on the throne, and he's so insecure, and I feel like I'm going to die. He keeps hunting me down, and he gets it off his chest. And you know the rest of the story, because you know how it ends. Saul's relieving himself in the cave, And his guys are like, David, now's your moment. God led him into your hand. Like, come on, come on, come on. Kill him, kill him, kill him. And David's like, I'm not going to lift my hand against the Lord's anointed. And your private rage before God allows you to treat your enemy with integrity in public. And I mean, I've been joking a lot, but I remember those congregational meetings and people would line up. We actually didn't even have microphones in those days, but people would line up and they'd say their piece. And I don't know where I learned it, whether it was the grace of God or whatever. I would just say, they'd rant for 5 minutes. I'd say, thanks very much. Next. Thank you. Thank you. Next. Thank you. And afterwards, I was upset. I was frustrated. The drive home, I'd be like, argh! But I can't tell you the number of people who would come up and go, Carey, how did you keep your cool in the midst of all that? And I'm like, I don't know, but I just knew, there's this old saying, never wrestle with a pig, because you both get dirty, but the pig likes it. All right, so just remember that. That's not in the Psalms, but you can pretend it is. But you know what? We better go to the next point. Okay. Empathize with the people who oppose you. Empathize with them. And you really want to do this. Because, you know what? I learned Andy Stanley is phenomenal with this. And he does things like when he gets angry, email. He said to us one day, he said, you know what? You just hey, if I was you, I would hate our church too. I get it. We're changing the game on you. I can understand it. The music's loud, preacher goes on and on. I get it. I wouldn't like it either, but people are coming to Christ. But I get it. And empathize with people who oppose you. Back to phones. If you break your phone, right, that's hard. You crack the screen. You're like, it's a manufacturing defect. No, it's not. You dropped the stupid thing on concrete. That's what you did. And you did it, and you walk in, and there's probably nothing Samsung or Apple can do, and you kind of know that, but they're expensive, and you want to see if someone will help you. If you walk in there and the guy's like, oh yeah, you dropped it on the phone, huh? Trying to pull a fast one. You're mad. If they go, can I see your phone? Oh man, that stinks. What happened? What happened, Ken? I was listening to this preacher, and he was quoting not from the Bible about pigs, and I threw my phone down, and I got so mad, and I broke it, and they're like, you know what, Ken, that's too bad. I'm sorry. That really stinks. So is it covered under warranty? Let me check. No, I'm sorry, it's not. But you see how much better you feel? Someone came alongside you. They came alongside you. And you need to be able to do that. Another thing you can do is I call it, the way I teach my team, it's reply relationally. So if someone sends you an angry email, call them. It's like, hey, it's Carey, I got your email. Right. They can't breathe for 2 minutes, and it's like, I didn't expect you would call. It's like, no, I read your email, and they're horrified, mortified, and, well, why don't we have a conversation about it? And then they're like, well, I wasn't, I kind of maybe took it a little bit far. And yes, you did, but you don't say that. And then, you just have a conversation with them, and you act like people. If they're mad at you in the foyer, like, bah, 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 finger stuff, it's like, let's have coffee on Tuesday. You tend to meet a rational person on Tuesday, and sometimes they'll change their mind. So reply relation. Another thing is wait a day. Just wait a day. Just wait. When you get angry, it's like, oh, I'll show them. Never goes well, does it? Ever. You're like, it's that whole never wrestle with a pig, right? You're right back to that again. And you don't want to do that. So just wait a day. Get a good night's sleep. I don't know who said it. Someone said this years ago. I read it. 70% of discipleship is a good night's sleep. Truth? It is. It's like, just go to bed. Pray about it. Talk to your spouse or a good friend about it. And if you're really not sure, I've done this with my team. I've sent them my response. They're like, Carey, you're being an idiot. It's like, okay, one more day. I'll just have to wait. But if they're like, no, that's a really good response. It's rational, cool-headed, whatever. Then you do that. So just wait a day. Never base tomorrow's decisions on today's emotions. It's a good principle. And then finally, strategy 5, don't quit. Don't quit. We kind of talked about that last night, but I want to finish this here. Most leaders are tempted to quit moments before their critical breakthrough. You know, there really is an enemy. And it's funny, as we become a pretty secular society, even people, Stephen Pressfield has this book called, I want to call it The Resistance, but that's not, it's called Do the Work. Short little book. And it's basically a theology of evil for people who don't believe in good and evil. And what he says is, every artist who creates feels an equal and intense force of opposition that makes them not want to do it. You want to reorganize your garage rather than work on that piece of art. You want to do anything but write that next chapter. And he says, there's just these forces in the universe that keep you from doing what's right. Well, we in the church have known what that's been for years, right? There is an enemy. And he would love for you not to succeed. He would love your church to reach 1/10 of its redemptive potential. He would love to see your city go unreached. He would love to see you discouraged and quit. And I've had a few of you say, you hung in there because of last night, and praise God for that. Like, he doesn't want you to quit, and he doesn't want you to shy away from the tough issues of leadership. So do the math and find a filter. And do the things you need to do. Focus on who you want to reach. Attack problems, not people. And don't quit. How do you not quit? Number 1, find friends. You can't do this alone. You need to find some people you can walk with. You need some people who can talk you off the cliff. You need some people who can help you see what you can't see and identify your blind spots. Number 2, see a counselor sooner. See a counselor sooner. If you're like, you know, because that was me, it was like, I send people to counseling. I don't go to counseling. Did I tell you I don't think I did last night about my first counseling appointment? My wife said to me, did I tell you about that last night? I don't think so. My wife said to me, she said, Carey, you have to go for counseling. I'm like, I send people to counseling. I don't go. And she goes, no, you need to go. Like, we are not in a good place. You are not a good husband right now. You need to go. And she's a lawyer. So anyway, pray for my family. We have 2 lawyers and 3 firstborns, so it's so much fun most of the time. And so we drove up to see this counselor who was a colleague of mine, and I remember I just sat in the parking lot, and I'm like, no, you go in. You're the one with all the problems anyway, right? Because that's what husbands think. It's not me, it's you. And I just remember she said, you need to go. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, and one of the best things I've ever done in my life. But I went in, I had to swallow all of my pride. And as I went in, you know, I went in with a long list of everything that was wrong with Tony and everything, my wife, and everything that was wrong with the world. And I left with a long list of everything that was wrong with me. And that was the far more accurate list. And you just need to see a counselor sooner. Because we've had a lot of fun tonight and we poked around, but at the end of the day, you know, you're limited by your growth and your willingness to grow as a leader. And just see a counselor sooner. And I don't know why counselors are so valuable in today's economy. I don't know whether it's because discipleship's in crisis. I don't know whether it's because community's in crisis or whether we used to call them spiritual directors. I don't know what it is, but just a good Christian counselor can help so much. And I saw mine again a couple weeks ago for a tune-up just to see how everything is. And you know what? On this side of heaven, we just need each other. And we need people who are trained. I always say, you know, I'm terrible at pastoral counseling people. I tried it in the early days. I would be like, oh, well, you got this problem, you know, do 1, 2, 3, 4. And then they would come back for the next session. I'd be like, well, so did you do what I said? And they'd be like, well, no, not really. I'm like, it's over. Like, we're done. Those were all my tricks. I don't have any other tricks. Sorry. Counseling session finished. So I'm a terrible counselor. I'm not very good at it because I just have like one trick and that's it. If it doesn't work, you're done. But you need to go see a counselor, and you need to get help with that. And then finally, create an encouragement file. Create an encouragement file. I used to keep like a manila file folder with actual thank you cards. Now everything's digital. I just have a Gmail folder called encouragement. And because you remember all the negative voices, but you never remember the positive ones. And if you keep it, you'll be amazed. You'll need like a whole filing cabinet for it over a decade or two. Or you'll need to buy extra storage on your computer because people send you encouraging notes all the time. You just forget. And when you're having a bad day, you go through that encouragement file. And when you want to quit because nobody loves you and nobody appreciates you and you have the most thankless job in the world, you just have to read your encouragement file. And you'll be 100 emails into it and you realize, God is using me. And so just create that because you need encouragement. And then finally, keep changing. Now, and some of you are leading growing churches, thriving churches. We were fortunate to be in that position at Connexus. But with that in mind, don't let success make you conservative. Because that's exactly what success will do. You will actually finally have something to lose. When you have 6 people, you got nothing to lose. It's like if we lose 6, it's not a big loss, right? I mean, we're going down anyway. Might as well go down faster. But when all of a sudden you have multiple campuses and locations and thousands or millions of dollars and hundreds or thousands of people, it's like, whoa, you become very conservative. And that's what success does. And you have to be careful because you become paralyzed by if we make changes to what we're doing, like this formula, it's not a formula, but this formula is working, so don't change it, don't kill the goose that laid the golden egg, and you have to be very wise, but success will make you conservative. And remember, the past has a nostalgia that the future never does. The past is always like, oh, that's awesome, it has a nostalgia. And the greatest enemy of your future success is your current success. The greatest enemy of your future success is your current success because success makes you conservative because you have something to conserve. I remember when we were 3 or 4 years into the change at the original small, tiny churches, there's a guy named Walter, and Walter came up to me one day, and Walter was angry. He was angry with everything we were doing, and we were ruining tradition and the whole deal. And he came up to me one day, and I always liked Walter. I had a soft spot for him, and he just said, Carey, I'm so mad at you that when I die, you won't be able to do my funeral. I'm not going to allow you. I didn't know that was a thing, but I guess, I've been banned from funeral doing. So it's like, all right. And sure enough, Walter died. And Tony and I, my wife and I, we were trying to figure out, do we go to the funeral or not? I'm not allowed to do it. And we should go. We should do the right thing. We should go. So we went to the funeral parlor, we went to the funeral home, and we sat there, and it was an interesting funeral because all the songs that we had stopped singing were sung at the funeral, and all the musicians who weren't allowed to play at the church anymore were allowed to be like the organists were at the funeral. And it was basically a put your, thumb on your nose salute to all the changes I had brought about. And so we're sitting there in the back row, my wife and I, and look around, and we are 40 to 50 years younger than everybody at that funeral. And it was really easy. Our church was growing, lots of young families, the whole deal. It was really easy. Conceit started to creep in, and I almost started to strut my stuff there silently in my head in the back row, kind of see? And then all of a sudden, my spirit got convicted, and I stopped. And instead, I said to my wife, you know what? If we're not careful, this is us in 30 years. And that's you in 30 years. That's you in 40 years because you love your church the way it is right now. You've made all the changes. You're successful. You're growing. Young families, the whole deal. And one day our kids are going to be around. What is the deal with all this coffee and, the pour over, drip, non-brew, single roast, hand ground coffee and how much Hillsong and how much Bethel music can you sing? Apparently quite a bit, If you go to our churches, it's like oceans. I think we went to every ocean over and over again. We were in the subarctic and the Pacific and every ocean. And how long are these songs? And are they ever going to finish? And, and we think church is great. And people are coming and people love it. But there will be a day where it stops connecting. And are you ready for that day? Because you'll just hang on to the method and you will lose the mission in the process, which is exactly what happened. And you're all hipster and you're all cool and you're all, one of my goals is I want to lead a church I don't like one day. You know, it's like I hate everything at our church, but it's reaching people. We're almost there. Not quite. But there are times where I'm like, really? That's what we're doing? That's what that looks like? And you just let all the kids make the decisions. It's like, you can make the decision. You make the decision. I'll stick to preaching. All right? But the greatest enemy of your future success is your current success. And that's why. And remember what's at stake. Remember the Great Commission? Remember that? Go into all the world. And if we don't change, that's our church. So here's how we're going to end tonight. I'm going to pray, but I would ask, and Ken and I talked about this, I would ask all of you who are sort of charged with leading change, because you know you're going to get home, you're going to be there tomorrow or the day after, or certainly by Sunday. And you're going to have the tough conversations. And if that's you because you're the lead pastor, or you're in Kidsmen and you got to make all kinds of changes, or you're on the elder board and you're like, yep, we got to make it. I'm just going to ask you to stand as I pray.